Hello everyone, this is Old Soldier. Today we're going to talk about a very somber and melancholy subject. How to prepare for an EMP or electromagnetic pulse or a CME. An EMP attacked by one of this country's enemies is the topic of a lot of popular fiction and makes for great fiction. One of my absolute favorite is 1 Second After by William Forstchen. There's any number of novels and movies out there that talk about what will happen in the case of an EMP, but really are they based in reality? A coronal mass ejection, or CME, could also wreak havoc with our nation's electronic grid. In fact, in September 1 of 1859, one did happen, known as the Carrington effect, named after the astronomer who observed it. Within a short period of time, the solar emission from this reached Earth, disrupted telegraph wire, shocked telegraph operators, and caused fires. In 1859, the dependence of this country on the electric grid and electricity is far less than it is now. Two excellent books that address the danger to our power grid by either an EMP or a CME are Blackout Wars by Dr. Peter Pry, who recently passed away, unfortunately, and EMP Attacks and Solar Storms by Arthur T. Bradley, PhD. That book is especially excellent, and I'll refer to it more than once in this video. Dr. Bradley holds a PhD in electrical engineering, and at the time of the writing of his book, worked for NASA. His book is full of excellent information on EMPs and CMEs and the aftermath. It is well worth the time and money to read, but I'll just cover a few of the main ideas briefly. Here, first one, a single high-altitude nuclear EMP could potentially disrupt electronic systems across the continental United States. In short, if one of our nation's enemy put a large nuclear weapon and detonated at, say, 120 miles over the middle of the United States, it could do severe damage to our electrical grid, and it could take an extended period of time to repair. Another theme, which I thought was worthy to check out, according to Dr. Bradley, testing suggests an EMP would cause approximately 70% of cars and trucks to experience an anomaly, with 10 to 15% immediately stalling. This is far different than the picture portrayed in the novel 1 Second After, where all modern automobiles ultimately fail, never to be fixed. So the grid goes down, the light goes out, and the water runs out. What do you do with you and your loved ones when all these things happen? I'm not an electrical engineer, but I have had a career of well over 30 years of dealing in the military and other related fields of contingency planning. Here are my thoughts and opinions. Let's talk about this. Water is elemental to human survival. FEMA recommends 1 gallon per day per person in your household for bathing and consuming. In some climes, this might be much more. Do you have any saved at your house? The idea of keeping enough water stored in your house for a year is both staggering and to many inconceivable. You should have some water on hand, and you should have a way to store, procure, and purify water. A water catchment system is good. A well is even better. Many Americans are not on a well system. If you're not, have sources of water identified, streams, rivers, and lakes near you where you could gather water. However, in an emergency, especially without the rule of law, gathering and bringing that water back to your location presents its own set of problems. Home water filters could be an essential item. They do have to be maintained. If you do have a home water system, do you have extra filters for it? Unless otherwise interrupted, natural gas may continue to flow if the electrical grid goes down. The gas from a gas stove or the burners from a gas stove can be used to boil water to help purify it. Please note that you will have to filter the water for particulate before you boil it, before it is fit to drink. Bleach is a good tool for purifying water, but it does have its drawbacks. The water will have to be filtered for particulate. It has a shelf life, and your drinking water will taste like pool water. Personal water filters are great, but should the grid crash, water sources that were once relatively pristine may be contaminated with human feces and other less desirable materials. This could make the purification level of once adequate personal purification systems inadequate. Second topic, protection and self-defense. Guns are a hot topic. I'm really not going to get into it too much. It is said that society is only 9 missed meals away from chaos. If the grid goes down and systems start to collapse, the rule of law will invariably be stressed, to say the least. This could lead to widespread civil disturbance and people just out to survive. What happens when the criminal element that was formerly held in check by law enforcement comes and gets the life-saving materials that you may have? You have to be able to protect yourself. This paints a very grim picture. While firearms and ways to protect yourself are important, they're not the only step. You have to have some system, organization, or support network around you, whether your survival group, your mutual assistance group, or just a band of friends and neighbors that band together in time of emergency. The lone wolf syndrome, while very romantic, is a hard sell. You simply cannot be awake 24/7. You'll need other people to help you. Other people will have skills that you do not. You can't master all of them. There will always need to be people pulling security and doing work. It's almost impossible to be able to do everything by yourself. Whatever your support network, whether it's family or friends or a combination of both, the time to think about this is before any emergency, let alone an EMP. Third topic of consideration, food. If the power grid is compromised by a CME or EMP, to say that the supply chain will be disrupted is the understatement of the century. We saw what happened during COVID with the serious EMP attack. It would be orders of magnitude worse. What happens when the stores are empty and the trucks aren't rolling? It is a staggering task to contemplate storing enough food for long periods of time. While hunting and fishing are useful skills indeed, with the whole population starving, fish and game would be reduced quickly. My father, who is a World War II veteran and grew up during the Depression, said that towards the end of the Depression, it was very, very rare to even see a deer because they had been hunted to near extinction. Dry foods stored and sealed in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers, canned foods, or freeze-dried foods are all ways to store food. It's a daunting task, but the longest journey starts with a single step. Start slowly and build up your pantry as you go. What do you need and what you feel comfortable is a personal decision. But I will tell you this, being hungry sucks. Canning and otherwise learning how to preserve food is a useful skill. The time to learn and practice them is now, rather than after an EMP, CME, or any other emergency has started. If the grid were to go down, all refrigerated and frozen food would have a limited life. It would be best to use up as much food that requires refrigeration or freezing and preserve what you can. All the rest should be cleared out, discarded appropriately as soon as possible. If left inside to spoil inside a closed freezer or refrigerator, those freezers or refrigerators will soon resemble science projects. Consideration number 4, sanitation and waste disposal. Literally, what are you going to do with your poo when SHTF? When the toilets won't flush, can you make them flush with some water you procured? What happens if the toilets back up and makes your house basically a hazmat site and uninhabitable? How much toilet paper do you have on hand? We saw the crisis with this in the shortages during COVID. Once again, in case of an EMP or CME, it would be orders of magnitude worse. Hand sanitizers and disinfecting wipes would be good things to stockpile and store. Do you have some? Do you have any? Do you have enough for a protected period? Field expedient latrines or commodes can be fashioned, but literally, what do you do with your poo? Can you bury it? If you do bury it, how does it affect your groundwater? Also, if you do bury it, you'll have to cover it with either lye or dirt. If you don't, flies will invariably land on it and then land on your hands or your food and spread disease. Sanitation, hygiene, and the lack of medical care will all be important factors, and there are considerations you must think about. Another consideration is medical. If an EMP causes the grid to go down, medical care will be hard to come by. Small problems will become big problems, and large medical problems will become enormous medical problems. Another consideration, if you or your loved one is diabetic or undergo dialysis or need some other form of life-saving medication, it might not be a bad idea to stockpile it. In the case of insulin, you'll also have to figure out a way to keep it cool. Incidentally, this issue is brought up in painstaking detail in the novel 1 Second After, and unfortunately, I feel is spot on. Some predictions have been made due to a number of reasons from lack of medical care to succumbing to psychosis or other addictions to mass starvation, the reduction in the population in parts of the United States could reach as high as 90%. A very grim prospect indeed. Shelter and protection from the elements is another great consideration. Do you have a sleeping bag, a heavy-duty sleeping bag, for every member of your family? Most people would stay in their homes for shelter, but what happens if you are forced to leave your home? Could you construct a shelter? Could you make another one? Do you have other people you could stay with in your support group? Do you have a tent? These are all things to think about. Additionally, how would you heat yourself? Can you make a fire? Are you lucky enough or smart enough to have a wood stove and the wood to keep it running? The use of backup generators and other small electrical devices that can be used on solar power are a hot topic. There's conflicting information about how they will or will not survive an EMP or a CME. Some information that I have read suggests that if you have a backup generator hardwired to the grid to automatically kick in, it is at a greater chance of becoming victim to an EMP and being rendered unusable. However, as I said, I'm no expert. The use of Faraday cages for small items is a good idea. There's all kinds of information on the internet on how to make them, and I'm not going to go into it today. Some Faraday cages of different sizes can also be purchased commercially. Preparing for EMP or a CME is a daunting task. Some people just want to shrug their shoulders and just say they can't bear to live with it, and if that happens, I'll die. Personally, am I 100% prepared? I am not. But I have made some preparations for emergencies, and that would include EMPs. And for me, you've got to live a little while before you live a long while, and I'm not willing to go quietly into the night. That's just me. I hope I have given you some food for thought. I know this is very grim material, but in order to address shortcomings, you have to recognize shortcomings. People talk about the zombie apocalypse and how if you're ready for zombies, you're ready for everything. Well, I think the possibility of a zombie apocalypse, which is once again great for fiction, is probably not going to happen. But CMEs have happened and invariably will happen again, and the potential for us to be attacked by one of our nation's enemies is always there. Well, that is enough rainbows and sunshine for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This is Old Soldier out.